So, hello and welcome to this NPTEL course titled A Novel and Change, where we're looking at John Thiem's take on Arkin Narayan's Guide, which is a novel we're studying for this course. So, this should be on the screen, but page 103 of Thiem's work, it contains the background to Guide in terms of how the novel got written, but what are the different kinds of moral ambiguities that Narayan had at that point in time. So, this should be on the screen, page 103, second paragraph. The Guide may have been written in Berkeley, but like Narayan's two previous novels, The Financial Expert and Waiting for the Mahatma, its more intimate, its more immediate origins came from an actual Indian source. And when asked in an interview about the possibility of elements in a novel having been transformed by his American experiences, he referred to it as totally Indian. So there is something very, very interestingly Indian about Guy, but at the same time, Narayan's own position is quite cosmopolitan. I mean, he has his exposures in American universities, so it's a fair question to ask whether there are any transformative American experiences. To which he responds by saying, well, his novels are totally Indian, but it's also a new kind of India. It's more metropolitan, more aspirational, more English speaking. So there is this entire economy opening up at this point of time. In My Days, he explains how the idea for a novel about someone suffering enforced sainthood came to him from a Mysore source. So, as we mentioned in the last class, the fictional town Malgudi is quite close to Mysore in some ways. We don't exactly know for sure which place that is. There are different kinds of ideas about it, but Mysore seems to be a pretty safe bet. But we also told that the whole idea of this little spiritual person who is forced to embody sainthood, that is an idea that came to him from a Mysore source. And what is that source? Let's read this. And I quote, "A recent situation in Mysore offered the setting for such a story. A severe drought had dried up all the rivers and tanks. Krishna Maharaja Sagar, an enormous reservoir feeding the channels, that irrigated thousands of acres, had also become dry. So we can see this is exactly what happens at the end of the Guide, because there's no rain, and Raju is expected to be this spiritual seer and prophet who is expected to bring rain through some complex rituals. So something similar had happened in Mysore that Narayana was aware of, and obviously he's drawing on that. So as a desperate measure, the municipal council organized a prayer for rains. A group of Brahmins stood knee-deep in water, procured at great cost on the dry bed of Kaveri, fasted, prayed, and chanted certain mantras continuously for 11 days. On the 12th day, it rained and brought relief to the countryside. So this is a really interesting story where in My Days, Narayan says, where in Mysore, there was this big drought, big lack of rain. And then when nothing else was working, the municipality hired a group of people, a group of Brahmins, really, the learned priestly class. And they came and stood in knee-deep water and performed different kind of rites, social, cultural, religious rites. And, as luck would have it, on the 12th day, it rained spectacularly. And of course, it brought massive relief to the countryside. Now, obviously, this is operated from a faith system. This is operated from economy of credulity. So do you believe this or not? It's a different debate to be had. But Narayan obviously is aware of a similar situation which took place. Now, the reason why the novel is a better novel than this is because Narayan doesn't tell us what happens at the end of Guide, whether rains come or don't come. It's a bit like, to give you a popular culture cinema analogy, it's a bit like what happens at the end of this Christopher Nolan film called Inception, where the top keeps turning and we don't quite know if it's dream or real, because there are top turns and then falls. It's a real thing. But if it keeps turning, it's a dream. But the camera moves away even before we have enough time to figure out whether it's for real or for virtual, right? So something similar happens at the end of Narayan's novel as well. It doesn't really give an answer. There's this cognitive indeterminacy, interpretative indeterminacy, which is deliberately designed, which is what makes a novel so complex. This potential for alternative interpretations afforded by this episode clearly made it ideal grist for Narayan's fictional mill. More than just this, the exposure of the ancient temple that had lain beneath the waters of the modern reservoir, and even to which Narayan takes over in the Guide, served as a metonym for the notion of an archaeologically layered India, albeit one in which different strata were coming to exist contiguously rather than a temporal sequence, since an ancient infrastructure was now present on the surface. So there's this palimpsest-like quality in Narayan's writing, where quite literally and symbolically different kinds of architectural designs, are built on top of other as different historical changes take place. There is that quality in Narayan's writing, particularly in Guide as well. So predictably, the ambiguity over which supernatural or normal meteorological forces were responsible for the coming of the rain to the area around the Krishna Maharaja Sagar Reservoir is carried over into the next novel, whether notwithstanding the views of some of Narayan's critics who have been eager to detect a causal relationship between Raju's fasting and a presumed end of the drought, the conclusion leaves the issue of whether spiritual intervention has occurred open, right? So that is left open. So we don't quite know, like I mentioned, it's at the top at the end of Inception film. We don't quite know whether it's a dream or real. We don't quite know whether the rains had come or it doesn't come. Maybe Raju just dies, one more theatrical performance, but we will never get to know. So in the guide, the group of Brahmins is replaced by a single sadhu, the reluctant former tourist guide, Raju. So Raju finds this trust upon him, this greatness trust upon him, whereby he is supposed to be, he's forced to be the spiritual seer. Literally, he's supposed to see the rains are coming or not. So Raju, who has resisted the burdens of sainthood imposed on him by the villagers among whom he finds himself and remains a suspect, a holy man to the very least. So there is this is an interesting point, because we find that Raju increasingly wants to run away from the village. He wants to escape the village, because there is this agile, aspirational metropolitan modernity which is beginning to happen in India, and where travel, connectivity all become better with the trains, with other forms of communication. So it makes a lot of sense for someone with Raju's inclination to leave at his first opportunity and go make a name for himself in this very creative capitalist industry, right? So there is that quality in Raju as well. So weakened by hunger, he says he can feel the rain coming from the hills. And although this may suggest the end of the drought is imminent, the opening ending leaves the unresolved. So he is dying word so that he can feel it rise along my body, right? So there's this viscerality, this embodied quality about what he says, but we'll never find out because the novel comes to an end with that last line. So this reading really leaves it sort of open-ended, as it were, or unresolved. So numerous critics seem to have missed this, and the range of misunderstandings or misreadings of the ending perpetrated by critics is a striking example of the extent to which books read people just as people read books. So, it's a really good phrase, books read people instead of people reading books. So different stages, different generations, different diachronic moments have identified themselves and differently. So the actual words of the closing sentence are as follows, and this is what we'll end with. It was difficult to hold Raju on his feet, as he had a tendency to flop down. They held him as if he were a baby. Raju opened his eyes, looked about and said, "Velen is raining in the hills. I can feel it coming up under my feet, up my legs." He sat down. So the last theatrical act that Raju does, he calls Velen in a public earshot of everyone and tells that he can feel the rains are coming up his feet. So almost like a spiritual, messianic, mythical quality, whereby he can feel, he can bring rain, he can have a visceral engagement with rain, etc. Except we never know whether it's for real or not, because we never get to know whether Raju actually experiences an epiphany, or is it just another sideshow with which he wants to move on and leave this posthumously before he collapses. So various issues remain undecided. The text not only leaves the question of Raju's possible promotion to sainthood open, it also fails to offer any kind of definitive information on whether the rains are actually coming or what Raju's eventual fate would be. So as you can see, what this sentence does is that progress of Raju and the arrival of the train are put together. So we don't know whether trains will come or not, and equally we don't know if Raju will succeed further in life or not, or is it just bad luck from now? However, at least two eminent critics have said that he dies at the end of the novel. So the conflict is quite divided. So some critics who are quite famous, they say that Raju dies in a novel. right? However, and others referred to as losing consciousness. We don't quite know. He falls down, he collapses. Whether that's a collapse which leads to his death, or is it a collapse which leads to his state of not being conscious, we don't know. This narrative indeterminacy, this interpretative indeterminacy is carefully crafted. But Saiging down is hardly conclusive evidence of either. So similarly, although the people of the local village, Mangala, a name which denotes spiritual auspiciousness, convince them that Raju is a saint, particularly when he is seen to be fasting to break the drought, he initially deceives them by eating in secret, and remains a moot point of whether or not he subsequently undergoes a transformation. Right. So this is interesting because what we see is Raju really doing a fast, to put an end to the drought. Now, whether that is what caused the rain, whether there's rain at all, we will never know. So there are these empty gestures, so sometimes maybe genuine gestures, we don't quite know. But from a reader response perspective, it's also a novel which makes it almost impossible to put a finger on the moral character of any particular subject, because there is such complex morality, which is also connected to the mutability, the sort of monstrous mutable metropolises which are happening across India at this point of time. Right, so the last bit before we wind up today, so the crucial point here, of course, is that Narayan chooses to, this is page 105, is that Narayan chooses to end the novel here with all these issues unresolved. So that's a very bold, brave, and artistically sophisticated decision to keep it all unresolved. So just don't cut it out and get rid of the knot. Let it stay knotty, let it stay unresolved, and that is the way interpretative momentum will pick up in the times to come. So commentating on the guide on a later occasion, Narayan said, that in an essay on the life of writing, he expressed exasperation at interviews who asked him whether Raju dies at the end of the story and whether it rained after all. So some people, some students, scholars, whoever met Narayan, asked him bluntly, did it rain in Kolkata that day that you mentioned, or is it just a date you make up at all? Right. So there is that quality of not knowing enough throughout the novel, and in some sense, it is also there when the reader is engaging with the novel, not knowing enough. Okay. So, in short, the guide resists any form of closure. So there's something very anti-closure about guide. We don't quite know. I mean, this can also lend itself to a sequel. We don't know. The ending raises the possibilities that some kind of spiritual transformation may be taking place within Raju, and that this may be accompanied by divine intervention so as to end the drought. But the final scenes are narrated in a deadpan, documentary style like manner, leaving the possibilities that Raju remains a charlatan, that he is the drought will continue as reasonable alternative inferences, right? So it is perfectly valid to read Raju as a con man, as a charlatan, equally perfectly valid to consider that a drought will continue even after Raju is either invalid or death, right? So both readings are perfectly valid, in which case it doesn't really matter. But there is also the counter argument which says, well, maybe because we don't know, Raju may have brought rain, Raju may have ended the drought. So comparing the novel with V.S. Naipaul's The Mystic Messiah, which also deals with the supposed metamorphosis of a rogue hero into a holy man. So it's a very funny novel, Mystic Messiah. Recommend you all read it, where a rogue agent becomes a holy man through some sartorial changes, right? So M.K. Naik suggests that the guide is finally very different from Naipaul's very earlier novel, right? So The Mystic Messiah obviously being the early novel, but the guide is quite different from that as well. Since in this case, a hero is transformed from a Picaro into a pilgrim. So with Naipaul's, there is a clear transformation. So there is a destination of the transformation, but with guide, there is no such thing, because we don't know what Raju will become if he gets an opportunity later. Certainly, there's a difference. Naipaul's protagonist, Ganesh, fairly obviously remains a charlatan to the very end, and although the ironic technique precludes its being said in as many words. So both, as you can see, the Mystic Messiah by Narayan, by Naipaul, and the guide by Narayan, they also operate in very subtle ways. They work with subtlety. It's not as if they're making big claims or the characters are larger than life. In fact, it's just the opposite in many sense. Okay, So Ganesh fairly obviously remains a character to the very end, and although the ironic technique precludes this being said in as many words, but Narayan's neutrality leaves the issue open. So again, this is a neutrality that Narayan often exhibits. He doesn't take any side. He doesn't give any kind of a narrative closure. So this suspension, this openness, and this detachment from the dailiness of life also allows him privileged insights into what is really going on, despite his having any kind of an experience with the politics of language, the politics of cognition. So Raju's status as a sadhu, a holy man, is a product of the views of others, and so it is as if Narayan is holding the phenomenon of the Hindu holy man up for inspection. So it's a very interesting observation. So Raju becomes the metonymy of holiness, and almost like in describing Raju, Narayan seems to be describing holiness attached to Raju. So that's interesting as well. Right. In the closing episodes, Raju's fast attracts a good deal of media attention and aimed the crowd to reporters that flock to Mangala, who is a local journalist, to cover his story in an American documentary skin filmmaker Malone, who is eager to shoot a documentary about the Swami, right? So again, we find that this is why I mentioned cinema at the very beginning, that Narayan incorporates, is obviously very aware of the newly emerging industry of cinema and the fact that there's a sort of nested narrative within the guide about a filmmaker coming, and that also shows the cultural apparatus that Narayan is very, very interested in, and this is why he wants to locate the guide, the novel. Narayan simply reports, but one appealing way of viewing the figure of Malone is to see him as a surrogate for potential American readers of the novel. So, the filmmaker almost introduces a novel in a very meta-fictional kind of way. His response to Raju, which blends ingenuousness and disingenuousness, seems to mirror Narayan's later reluctant guru comments on American interest in India, and possibly also involves a materiality sort of meta-literary anticipation of how it feels the novel may be read in the United States, which is why I mentioned that there's a reader response theory one can also do. Narayan seems to be doing some kind of meta-literary anticipation of how this novel is likely to be oriented in terms of reception. His comments on this identification with Raju, a secular man who finds himself the object of American interpretation and appropriation as a guru, certainly lends support to such a view, although in Raju's case, enforced sainthood is first imposed on him by the local villagers. So I stop at this point, but this requires a little bit of unpacking. Just like Narayan, when he visited the US, there was this enforced saintliness or enforced spirituality which was given to him as part of his entire writing persona, the public persona, which he resisted, which he was very reluctant to appropriate. The same resistance and reluctance may be seen as transferred over to Raju, who starts off with this very petty, secular, non-religious person, but he finds himself in the middle of a situation where he looks very, very spiritual. He has this entire iconic totemic presence of a spiritual person, and then that generates immediately an economy of expectation around him, which forces him really to keep performing what he does. So at some level, the novel is also a performance. The novel is also about performative identities and what happens to identity when society, moral vocabulary, spiritual vocabulary all begin to change very, very quickly, right? So identity becomes less ontological and more performative in quality. And we find it's literally the Rosie, the performance artist in the novel, who dances, and of course Raju, who performs with his lies and fibs and his fabulation, etc. So performance becomes a very important part of what we call prosthetic identity. Identity is outside the body, but part of the ever fluid, ever expansive, ever interconnected cultural apparatus, right? So we stop at this point today, and we'll continue with this reading in the subsequent sessions. Thank you for your attention.